to leave, that now they want these Afghans to stay, that they're needed to rebuild the country.
Again, our expectation and what we will continue to convey directly through a range of channels we have is that the individuals, the special immigrant visa applicants, those who are eligible, those who we are facilitating their departure will be able to reach the airport.
You guys, I wanted to get your thoughts on this because what some folks are anticipating at this point is the execution of allies now that they've been identified. Do you think that that is a concern, or do you truly think that they're hoping these allies can help rebuild the nation?
Brother Mac, you on mute. I could jump in there just to give him a second. I'm going to come down on the side of two things: the theatrics of it, the fact that this is being broadcast. It's a bit of a kabuki theater in the sense that it seems like a dog and pony show. It's kind of staged in the sense of what the Taliban is requesting, and the fact that we're broadcasting as is. But one thing that I heard in that broadcast was that they were asking specifically for scientists and doctors. The reasoning and the argument is sound. If they're going to rebuild Afghanistan, they do not need a brain drain. But what is the reality thereof? Brother Mac, I'll yield the floor to you.
Nope, still on mute.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yep, we hear you now.
Okay, listen, my position has been the same all the way through, is that for those allies who supported America, it is clear based on the past history of the Taliban of what they plan to do as far as seeking their revenge for supporting Americans. Now, let's assume that there were doctors and lawyers and all the folks who they say they need to stay in this country who were allies to the U.S. Well, do you think? I don't believe that they're going to be so concerned with rebuilding Afghanistan as much as they're going to be concerned about seeking their revenge. So if there is drama, if there is theater here, it is that the Taliban needs to have a reason. They have to give some type of reason as if to stop all Afghans from leaving. Because that's their rhetoric, is let's stop all Afghans from leaving. And it is clear based on their history, what they've already cited, what they've already started doing, and that is to seek revenge on any of those allies who supported America. So that's why this rhetoric is coming out right now, because you're not going to tell me that there are folks in Afghanistan who are so committed to doing this that they, rebuilding the country. I get that piece of it, but I also understand, as do most people, understand the history of the Taliban and what they plan to do to those who supported the United States, AKA the allies.
And I think it renews for me the conversation that we were having the last time we discussed Afghanistan. And I know Ben and Brother Mac, you guys both had different thoughts and theories on Biden's strategy to exit. But again, this is just adding fuel to that fire, where a lot of people felt that his exit strategy was not well thought out. And so now hearing this new news that the Taliban is not going to allow any more allies to leave adds to that theory that he could have planned this out better. But he's sticking to the August 31st date. The last thing that we're hearing from other folks who really analyze wars, they are saying that now at this point, Biden is taking orders from the Taliban because he's not pushing back against that, and he's not really sticking to his plan, and his commitment, which was to evacuate 60 to 80,000 allies. He's basically retreating on that goal and deferring to the Taliban's orders over their own country. I know we kind of ran out of time the other day when we were discussing this, but I'd love to hear, Ben, Brother Mac, your thoughts on Biden's exit strategy. Ben, you were saying that you felt like he really did what he could. But what are you thinking now, seeing this new development?
I think that you mentioned the people who analyze war. Shout out to them, because they also said that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Shout out to that same group who are peddling these narratives that I would argue are not rooted in history, particularly because they have a financial incentive. I'm speaking of CNN, MSNBC, all of the organizations whose entire media infrastructure is paid for by the military industrial complex. I want to be sure. I think that there is a narrative that is being spun to undermine the Biden administration, because I do still see strategy in this, particularly because, well, they're asking for scientists. They're asking for attorneys. They're asking for the exact people that they need to build a country. And if we're going on my premise, which is we are headed towards the Taliban being recognized as a legitimate regime over the government of Afghanistan, then they are going to need those individuals.
Then I would take the premise that those who analyze war are doing a very decent job. I want us to imagine now, it is clear that the U.S. lost the war in Vietnam. Many said that we shouldn't have been there. But trust and believe the parallels between these two situations is this. The United States, when they went into Vietnam, they needed local support, and they got that local support. But when they exited, they took almost 50,000 folks who aided them in their efforts in Vietnam. That is the situation here. That is the only part of this exit strategy that has been a soup sandwich, which is now, and to this day, I will say this, the last report that I heard from the Biden administration is that they have evacuated almost 70,000 people. Now, I didn't hear a clear breakdown of that 70,000 being how many of them were Americans and how many of them were allies. Because again, if they place the estimate of 80,000, if that estimate is based on solely allies, and you're up to 70,000, and you have a withdrawal deadline by August 31st, it is clear that it looks pretty good that you could make that. But now, if the 70,000 is an all-encompassing number, meaning 70,000 includes U.S. citizens, U.S. soldiers, and allies, and I don't know how many U.S. citizens are there. I don't know how many soldiers are there. So it depends on what that 70,000 is. But if by August 31st, President Biden withdraws all of the allies, as far as I'm concerned, it may have started as a soup sandwich, but somehow he would have turned that around. So that is the only premise that I'm saying, is that throughout wars in which we've gone into countries, invaded countries, and we needed local support, that local support has been identified as our allies, and we have taken care of those allies. That is the crux of the issue here. Can we take care of those allies? And it is clear to me, based on past performances, based on history being, that the Taliban has a history of seeking revenge against anybody who goes against their ideology. And that is what I believe they want to do it in this juncture, and why they're now saying we don't want any more Afghans to be evacuated from the country.
With all due respect.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I yield the floor.
Oh, I was just going to say, and to your point, when you look at the numbers at this point, basically anything anyone is doing is just speculation, because we don't know the exact numbers. We don't have a head count. And I'm anticipating we're not going to get that number until all of the soldiers have left after August 31st. That might be the update September 1, where we get an update that all of the military has withdrawn, how many allies are here, how many American citizens are here, if there's any Americans that decided to stay. Until we get those concrete numbers, at this point, everyone is just speculating. And so, to your point, Biden may have hit his target, and we don't know. On the contrary, he may be far off, and the Taliban is putting this hold in place. The other thing that concerns me is the amount of Americans who may remain so committed to their allies that they refuse to leave now, just to, make good on their own promise. And so I anticipate over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to continue to see Afghans figure out a way to leave their country and to get here. One thing we haven't talked about that I want to ask you guys about before we move on, I think is really important on this issue, is the condition of women in Afghanistan. And it seemed as though that was one thing that us occupying their country, did for them is we were able to advance the condition for women. And now already in just, 2 week span of time, we're seeing a digression in the way that women are treated and the rights and the opportunities that they're afforded. What are your thoughts on the condition of women and how they're going to be subjected to what feels like second-class citizenship now that the Taliban, to your point, Ben, is becoming basically the government regime?
Yeah, I would definitely say that this is one of the red flags. Right. This is one of the things that the entire international community is rightfully watching to see how they are going to treat women in their country. The entire world is going to be watching because that's what's going to be untenable. Right. We judge a society by how they treat the least in their society. And if women in their hierarchical order, this is the difficult part, because if you look at the United States relationship with other nations, we don't always predicate our relationships based on how they treat women. Check out Saudi Arabia. But if we are going to engage with the Taliban in that way, there are some red lines in the sand. And I believe how they treat women is most certainly the right one.
And Georgia, the other thing, for all of us is, again, this goes back to why did we ever invade Afghanistan in the first place? Did we invade Afghanistan to change their culture towards women? I don't think you'll find a person around that'll say that's the reason we invaded Afghanistan. We invaded Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden, who was deemed to be the mastermind behind 9/11, was said to have been taking up refuge in Afghanistan. And we asked the Afghan nation to turn him over, and they refused to, so we invaded it. So if the premise of us invading Afghanistan was so that we can get the masterminds behind 9/11, and that happened, if that happened, and I don't know the answer of the totality of who was on that list of masterminds, but let's assume that it happened. If that happened, now you want to leave Afghanistan, I would consider that a victory. But if in the midst of you being in Afghanistan, you decided, hey, a new objective while we're here is to make sure that we provide a culture in which women are recognized as equal citizens. If that became your objective, then clearly at this point, you are going to have lost that war. Because again, I'll go back to what is predicated. And we have to keep in mind that I have no idea how old Afghanistan is, but that culture has been around for a lot longer than America has been in existence. And now here becomes the arrogance, right, wrong, or indifferent. Here becomes the arrogance of America, is to say, we want to go in and tell you what your culture ought to be. Now, do I think that women all over the world, people all over the world should be treated equally? Absolutely. But who am I to tell some other culture how they need to deal with it? Even in this country, I've watched Americans try to go in after having taken Native Americans and relegated them to reservations to go in and try to tell them. I know in the state of Washington that they can no longer do traditional whale hunting, get in a canoe and go out and hunt whales for food. All of a sudden, we're now trying to tell these people how they ought to live. So that becomes a big issue. But to everybody's point, and I'm in certain agreement, that the world is going to be watching the way that this new Afghan regime treats these women. And again, based on history, I think everybody ought to understand what we think is coming, and that ain't good.
Well, actually, I was going to say, I thought you were going to say, based on history, what are we going to say about America's treatment of women? Because as much as we have had progress in this country, we are literally faced with constitutional challenges to so many rights. There is a contingency in the United States that would perfectly align with the demagoguery, the ideology, and there's a word specifically I'm looking for. It escapes me. But the ideology is good enough of the Taliban, that patriarchal domination of women, subjugation of women, no rights. There is a contingency in the United States of America that has amassed power to execute that exact type of agenda against women in the United States of America. So I would agree with you, Brother Mac. Who are we to judge? But the world is watching Taliban.
Absolutely. And I believe that the world is also watching the way in which we have decided to leave Afghanistan. The world is watching as the Taliban is stepping up. And I think some people are concerned that there may still be some risk of future attacks. That after 20 years of occupying that country, how much progress did we really make? Because it feels like things just within 2 weeks have really gone back to where they were when we first entered the country 20 years ago.
Georgia, one of the things I will look at is I want to go back and do a little research and find out who is it that that America identified as the masterminds behind 9/11, because it was clear that the message that was given to the American people is that we're going into Afghanistan to seek retribution against those who caused the greatest terrorist attack in the history of this country, which was 9/11. So I want to go back and see who were the masterminds, and then did we get those masterminds? And if we did, at what point did we get them? Because at the very point, let's assume that there were 8, 10, arbitrarily, let's put a number at 10. Let's say that there were 10 people identified as the masterminds behind 9/11. And let's say that we got all 10 of those people. On the day that we got that 10th person, that should have been the day that we began our evacuation out of Afghanistan. If we look at that and find out that on that day we got them, we stayed there, and then the operation changed, then that becomes what is debatable, what is so confusing to us as to why we stayed in Afghanistan so much longer than we needed to be there. And now, if indeed those objectives change, it is clear that based on the change of those objectives from its original intent, one could say it is clear that America lost the war in Afghanistan. It lost a lot of lives, American lives, spent a lot of money over there only to walk away with your tail between your legs. Because the truth of the matter is the Taliban was in place when we invaded Afghanistan. And now that we're leaving, the Taliban is back in place in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So much to say, so little time. Let me start with the fact that I think you'll find history will align with the latter argument, Brother Mac, that we got who we needed to get and we stayed there as an occupying force far beyond our need. But we'll let the historical record speak to that. I would like to say that I would like to enter into the conversation that there are reasonable actors. There are logical, reasonable actors in Afghanistan. If the president of the United States, Donald Trump, could say that there's good people on both sides of that Nazi equation, then I think that people who are reacting to the invasion of their country amongst the people who are the rebellion against the imperial invasion of the United States of America, because we cannot understand Afghanistan or the Taliban if we do not consider it from the perspective of the people who were invaded. And from their perspective, there got to be reasonable people in that group. And I don't subscribe or ascribe to that group, all of them, to be belligerent actors solely seeking revenge. They are not. They are human beings who are reacting to an invasion that came as a result of an action taken by a force, Osama bin Laden, who was actually funded by the United States when we went up against Russia in a proxy war in Afghanistan in the 80s. So there is a history. Hang on one second, Brother Mac. There is a history that goes far beyond 9/11. Excuse me. There's a history that goes far beyond 9/11. And that history includes the United States creating the very enemy that attacked us on 9/11.
Ben, I get the perfection of the ideology of your argument. I get that. I absolutely understand it. But the reality is that the Taliban has shown in its historical nature that anyone who does not align with its ideology will face death. And to know that America invaded Afghanistan and that there were allies who provided incredible resources, who provided incredible information in order for the U.S. to seek its retribution is not going to be deemed beautifully. Now, when I say by the Taliban, I'm not talking about the specific of each and every person who identifies themselves as a member of the Taliban, no more than we can say because a black person said something, all black people said it. I get that, Ben. But the fact of the matter is the Taliban has a distorted, perverted history of, and that distortion and perversion, to your point, I will give you this. That's based on the way that I see it. But based on their culture for thousands of years, that may be the norm. But it is one to say that anybody who steps out against their ideology will face a certain demise. I think we can, something. That's the way I see it.
Something analogous to the police state coming down on you and putting its boot on your neck. There's just so many historical parallels to how the United States of America itself will do exactly what the Taliban or what we're accusing the Taliban of being ready to do. And while I'm not going to lead the conversation where we draw a whataboutism, an analogy between the Taliban and the United States, I would encourage and I would say that we must understand it from the perspective of the people who were invaded. We have to, if we may not leave it there, but if we don't insert into the international conversation the perspective of the people who were the victims of the United States, then we are not having a true discussion.
And the only point that I'll make is this. To me, this would be, for whatever reason we were there and however we came out of it. My only point, and I want to be very clear, is that if there were people, allies, who supported America while we were there, and America made a promise to those allies, and when I say those people, and I talk about allies, I'm saying right now, you, George, and myself are all related. If I were the one that was providing help to the United States, I want the protection of you and Georgia as well. So the United States needs to live up to its promise on exiting Afghanistan to make sure that all of our allies, that they honor the promise of protecting all of our allies. That is the alpha and omega to my issue about the exiting of Afghanistan.
And I would just say, George, and turn it back to you, if I were in that equation at all, I would be on the side of the people resisting the United States of America, just kind of in my DNA.
And if you were my family member, you wanted to stay, I'd let you stay.
Well, there
Others
you have
divided.
it. There you have it. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up our conversation here on the clock. Ben, check your Slack, and we're going to turn now to California, where there is a disturbing story out of Salinas High School. There's a handful of children who I tend to believe are daughters and sons of those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Take a look at this and you'll see why.
One Central Coast high school dealing with the fallout from a racist incident that went viral over the weekend. Happened at Salinas High School and involved racist overtones directed at the African-American community.
And Aaron, a full investigation has been launched to find those directly involved in not one, but several racially motivated incidents here on campus.
Racist incidents went down at Salinas High School involving a small black doll that students stomped on and drove over.
Videos and Instagram posts began circulating over the weekend depicting Salinas High students posing with a black baby doll they named Shaniqua on this now deactivated Instagram account. The posts on the account have left many residents shocked, calling the images disturbing and racist.
The president of the local NAACP did meet with district leaders today. She released a statement shortly after that meeting, and it reads in part, she wants the district to send a clear message, a direct message, make it crystal clear that there will be consequences to their very serious actions. Of course, she's talking about the students that may have been involved here. The statement also goes on to read that those involved in this incident have been identified as student leaders at the school, and it is imperative that school administrators remove them immediately from these roles.
So basically, you had a group of white children who took a black baby doll, named it Shaniqua, gave her an Instagram page, and ultimately the fate of the baby doll was that she was stomped out and ran over with the car. And so I will be following this story to find out what type of consequences these little Karens are going to be facing. But it brings back this conversation of why the Black community continues to talk about race, because it is a learned behavior. These high school students just wake up one day and decide that they were going to have this hatred for Black people and assimilate that hate to a doll, but what concerns me is that this will be an example of just how severe the consequences will be. Like, will they be able to manage disseminating this hate? Will the school really crack down, or will they just give them a slap on the wrist and send them off into the world, allowing them to believe that they can conduct themselves this way and get away with it?
George, I would say this. One of the things, I'd like to believe that we're making progress from yesterday. So one of the things that I'm going to be watching, and as you follow this story, I want to see what the peers in California, what do other high school students in California think about what those particular students did? Because let's assume that there's a great agreement that it wasn't that big a deal. Then that's a true indication that we got a long way to go in this country, which is why, again, critical race theory ought to be taught so America and these children can understand exactly the way that America dealt with a certain group of people. So it ties back into the discussion that we were having about Afghanistan. How we ultimately view Afghanistan depends on whose lenses we view it through, right? You view it through the lenses of the Afghans and the Taliban. We were absolutely wrong for invading the country. Through another set of lenses, so through the lenses of other high school students in the state of California, I want to see what their reaction is going to be to this situation.
Brother Mac, I love when we're flying at such a high altitude. I have to check my six and make sure I heard your argument, man, because that was actually a brilliant analysis. And to go one step further, we can't indict the entire school, but that's what we're really good at in terms of how we kind of navigate these circumstances. But what we certainly can interrogate is that home training and that collective ideology. Where is it? Where's the root of that thing? Is it in the school culture? Well, now that's a horse of a different color. Then we need to interrogate the entire school, right? But to get that perspective, Brother Mac, this is what it was so brilliant. You have to submit to, you really got to look through the lens of the people who were affected by this and impacted by this. So I don't want to just hear us attack those young women those little Karens who did this. I want to hear from the victims to understand where the root of this bigotry is. Is it in the school culture, or is it the fact that it's in the community culture by virtue of their parents?
I would argue that once you put it online, all Black people are affected by this, because now here, look at that. They're stomping out a Black baby. So now as a mother, what visual does that give me about my own children? And the school is a microcosm of our broader society. And so it's rehearsal. When you go to school, when you're in high school, especially, it's rehearsal for college. When you're in college, it's rehearsal for what? The real world. And so this is a rehearsal. And that's why I'm putting so much pressure for the school system to hold them accountable, to crack down and say, we're going to create a culture where this is not tolerated, so that when you go to the next level, you can understand that there's going to be even more serious repercussions for your choices here. But absolutely, the bigotry starts at home. That's where it's taught. When you look at the curriculum, no, they're not blatantly teaching racism in school, but they're not teaching against it either.
And Georgia,
critical theory definitely should be adapted as well. I don't think that CRT is going to fix that, though. I think that you're still going to get kids, even if you're teaching CRT, who are going to show up, who are going to have it in their heart to stomp out a Black baby doll and name her Shaniqua, and put it on Instagram.
And Georgia, I absolutely agree with everything. Not one thing that you said I disagree with. In addition to that, but I really do want to see, what does the rest, let's assume that this was a group of 50 students. Absolutely, they were racist in what they did. But I do want to see, what does the rest of the student population at that high school, what do they think? Do they come down on it's a 50-50 split? Or what would happen if the overwhelming majority of students in that population, if they themselves came down on these racist little children with their behavior? I don't care if they're children or not, they're still racist. I don't care who taught them. They taught them to be racist.
That's right.
But I want to see what the rest of the student population does and what is their say about this. Because it is clear what the three of us as adults, what we think about it. They're racist little demons.
Yes. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I did not see that one coming. But go ahead, Brother Mac. I'm sorry. Only thing I would add to that, One thing that I would add to that is that something that they pointed out in the chat. This is from Six Dragon Daddy. Thanks to DJ Exclusive for catching this. He says some of it may not even be parents. It also comes from kids at the school, and you have that one that is the leader and guides the rhetoric, and then the damn internet. I would offer on top of that, the real analog between this and Afghanistan is Donald Trump, -45. Now, even if the parents aren't bigots, even if the community is actually a thriving community, we have had in front of us for the last 4 years the type of bigotry in the president of the United States that would foment this just because. And so I would wonder if I would just this is a cheap shot, Brother Mac. We don't have time to actually go into this. Maybe we do it in the next segment. But could you imagine? Well, no, I'm about to flip it in reverses. Could you imagine if we were invaded in order to remove Donald Trump from power? That's kind of the lens we might want to talk about in the next segment. I'm sorry for throwing that out there, but at the end of the day, these kids are racist and we need to handle it.
No, at the moment that movie started, the crescendo would have come in. It would have been over quick and in a hurry.
Georgia, I'm sorry we ran so long.
Well, that's all the time we have for On the Clock, but it sounds like you guys got a lot to stick around for this morning. So keep it here for more on the Benjamin Dixon Show.